Welcome back to part two of what I call the Don Gill years.
I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action.
One of the things I want to make sure we do is capture some of the other folks who are in it. And I'm not going to ask you guys to name everybody you remember or anything like that. But who are, from this distance, and I know that's also not fair, but from this distance, are there some names and people who pop up in your mind and say they were significant at this time for X reason or something like that? Who are some of those folks?
We've already mentioned Paul Toms. Paul was at Park Street and a wonderful pastor to that congregation, but also was involved with a lot of other larger organizations. But he took a very personal interest in the EANE at that time, Vision New England. And I know my dad really appreciated his involvement, often behind the scenes, not in front, behind the scenes. And those are the people that meant the most, I think, at times for my dad.
Gordon, some names that come to mind for you?
Yeah, we had a layman in our church by the name of Nathan Hubley.
Mm-hmm.
Hubley came to faith in Jesus back in the 1940s. In business, he ascended to the presidency of the Carter Ink Company, which was a medium-sized, well-known company across the United States. And he was the president and CEO. And he helped found Grace Chapel. If you go back into the Grace Chapel years, it starts with a woman who, it is said, prayed this church into existence. And then there was a handful of young couples who moved out of Cambridge and Boston to Lexington area and bought small homes and had a base. And Nathan Hubley donated his basement for a Sunday morning worship service. And so these 10 or 12, 15 people would get together on Sunday morning, and they would have their worship. And then they moved to rented quarters, and the growth of Grace Chapel took over rather pleasantly. But at the corner of it all was Nate Hubley. When this man said something, everybody turned their head. He was like the E.F. Hutton of the old advertising years. And I had to preach to him every week. And he knew more about the nature of Christian grace and love than I'll ever know in the rest of my life. But it was men like Nate Hubley and a half a dozen more from some of those 128 churches. If they hadn't been there to carry the weight, those young pastors like myself who was trying to figure New England out, we would never have made it. But Hubley was there all the time to make sure that God was speaking into us and through us.
Yeah.
And you have several other men and women like that after the years.
I think I concur. First, we salute the lay people who really rose to the challenge, had the vision, and really supported ministers and ministries throughout New England. I know there was also other organizational leaders like Doug Hall and Judy Hall from Emmanuel Gospel, they were just in their early years too. And Dad really connected with Doug, and they would have many conversations together. I remember they went to a significant lecture down over at MIT, and it was one of those, it was Forrester, I think, who was talking about systems management, and both of them just went crazy. Only those two would go crazy, but they just had a great relationship. And even Sol Vadrine, who is kind of the patriarch of the Haitian ministry and pastors that is not only still living, but thriving. Saul, whenever I see him, Saul just lights up because he remembers the time he came to the office at 6th floor of Tremont Temple, and he didn't know what to do or where to go. And Dad was the one who just connected him with Doug. And today there are hundreds of Haitian pastors in the greater Boston area. And that was just those connections. And those were significant to my dad. That built trust. And what he's doing. And then a very different kind of, and it's not a person. You know how Time Magazine has Person of the Year and then sometimes Persons of the Year? Yeah. I would say places like Park Street with its strong student and young adult ministry, my dad had more people who stepped out of college and worked at the sixth floor of Tremont Temple for many years. And I could name a few, from Kevin to just kind of, and over the years, in fact, many are still in ministry throughout New England. But it was that core of people that had a vision for ministry, and took a few years, sort of like a fifth year or whatever, to kind of look and be exposed to the larger picture of what God was doing. And they would plug in and work there. So it wasn't, but those people would be unnoticed pretty much. But Dad had a relationship with them because and they were very supportive over the time.
To some sense, the Christianity of the 40s, 50s, and early 60s was a very individualistic faith. It was, each man, each woman for themselves. When your dad came, there was a turnover going on, and it needed a person who understood relationships.
Yeah.
I think in those first years, he was the right guy to be there to put people together. And I wonder if it would have worked 10 years before.
Yeah. Good point. For such a time, that's yeah. And some things are, Charles, are coming kind of full circle. What he began to do was to do seminars that just help people. That wasn't happening.
Okay.
And part of that was because there was a kind of a total reversal of emphasis. And that is, for the history of EANE, it had been pretty much the organization that was supporting larger evangelistic works, from crusades down through the years, from Moody all the way to Billy Graham and everything in between, or Child Evangelism Fellowship, or other movements, what we would know as parachurch, but today we like to call them movements. And so but these were not necessarily, in the church. It was kind of, let's get the church to do this or that. And what they had early on, there was one of the staff people, they were having one of their staff discussions, and Dad would often say, they just stopped at one point. He says, we're called the Evangelistic Association. I guess we're supposed to know how to do evangelism. And it was at that moment that it dawned on them that it's the people of God who need to do evangelism. They're in the church. Mm. Let's help the church become the church. Yep. We don't need to just do the evangelism. We need to help, So they started, and one of the things they started to do, Congress, but what was seminars. And the first one, this is where it's full circle, was the discipleship seminar. Hmm. And they just pulled in somebody from California and from New England, and they started to do a discipleship to say, how in the church do we see people being raised up, making disciples, making more disciples, reaching people for Christ? And so there was that was just the first kind of where they put the boat in the water. And then resourcing happened. But the shift was in the mindset to say, we're here to build up the church. And that's what started to make the big difference. We're not here for you to support what we're doing, in a sense. We're here to really equip you in any way we can with others, whoever can resource you in that. That was a key shift. In that. And I think it may be, but you were saying, Gordon, there's differences in shift. And I think up to that point, it was I think Ralph Winter, missiologist, called it the 25 unbelievable years in the post-war, because if you didn't have it, you just started a new organization. Mm. And so you had all these organizations doing things. But what was getting lost possibly in it is the local church. And that's what's the shift in the early 70s, to begin to say, how do we help the church, pastors, but also Christian leaders, grow in Christ and become the church that God wants?
Well, where does church planting come into this? Because it seems to me, as I look over the landscape now, something is aborting all over the place. And this younger generation is not as interested in populating old churches as they are in making new ones.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As I drive through New Hampshire and Vermont, I see all these little churches suddenly appearing all over the place. So it's another step in the church's history.
Yeah. Yeah. In the 70s, I think one of the first things that happened, there were obviously some church planting going on, but it's really when our good brothers and sisters from the Baptist came up, and the Southern Baptists planted a ministry here and said, we want to do some church planting. That's where you started to hear for the first time kind of an intentionality to church planting, not just the classic New England divide the church. That's how we've done church planting all of our years, right? Division, but this was an intent. So that started in the early 70s, and it just grew. And of course, they're still strong, but every other organization too. But I can't really answer the question, Gordon, but you're right. It's just the multiplicity of ministries that say we need to start something new is much more in the newer generations.
Well, the old iteration you're talking about, it depended on church planting the old way, which would be you go into the location and there are a lot of individual seats. The new church planting takes into account a large visiting space and maybe chairs that can be moved around to accommodate 4 or 5 different functions in a daytime. So there is a sociological change that has happened, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
You drive through New England and you look at most old churches, there's no room between the front door and the sanctuary. And yet what we've all discovered is if you don't have place for people to stand around and talk, get to know each other, they won't stay there long anymore. They demand relationships.
Yeah.
We see that in New Hampshire all the time.
Yeah. Now, one name you guys haven't mentioned, but I know because I've come across it a couple of times, and Dennis, you and I have talked about, is Alan Emery.
Oh, yeah.
And who was...
Yeah, Alan II was really the one who, because he was also on the board of Billy Graham, was the one who was chairman of the board when my dad came. And his son, the third, became after him. But Alan Emery, the first, was the board. So the Emery family, Emily men, were really, for many, many years, chairman of the board of VNE. And Alan had a remarkable ministry himself, the second, in terms of evangelism. You can still go around, my generation, you can go around and find clubbers. And a clubber was a person who went to the club at the Emery home down south on the South Shore, and many of them came to Christ. I had missionary friends, pastors. I know Jack up in Maine, Dick, who was a missionary. They came to Christ at the Emery Bible study. And Alan, he was a remarkable teacher, illustrator, but they had this club up in this mansion, and clubbers came. And so he had his own ministry that was amazing. He was pretty much involved with Park Street and Harold John Ockengay, but he was also involved at large. And so he would be a person that would really be featured in those years.
And that club met at his house, which was in Weymouth, which is now part of a park there. And I think they're trying to do restoration of that house because he left it to the city. And that club met in his house for 30 years.
Yeah,
as I found out. And you guys may know this, but I'll share it just because you may find it interesting if you don't. There were 4 girls at one point in that club who were praying for another girl in their school to get saved. And that girl was Rindy Bennett. And Rindy is on our board today. And I know you guys both know Rindy and the Bennett family. And so Rindy was prayed for by girls at Alan Emery's house. And her father got saved at a Billy Sunday revival. And we were Billy Sunday's partner doing revivals in New England back in turn of the century, 20s, whenever that was. And so that history is, to me, is so exciting. I don't want to lose it. And so what would be a funny recollection of Don's time at Vision New England?
Funny?
Yeah. Maybe the story he doesn't want you to tell.
Oh boy, I'm going to have to think about that one.
Yeah, nothing's really coming to mind, Charles. I'm sure there are. Yeah. Just nothing's really jumping at this point. What
would Don say, do you think, looking back at his time there of what he saw God do? And if that's an unfair question, just tell me.
Well, I do wonder. He reminds me of the type. He would spend time traveling around New England and looking for the winners. And when he sought the winners out, you want to sit down with them and exhaust them of all the detail of what they know that was making that ministry a winner. And that's good marketing, isn't it?
Yeah.
He was always curious. He always wanted to know, what are you doing here? What are you doing there that makes that successful or whatever? I never heard him disparage anybody. And, that's a terrible temptation in Christianity to always be, yeah, he's a good preacher, but he's not so hot here. And Don and then he wanted to exalt the men and women who punched forward and somehow were filled by the Spirit of God and had something to say that other people could profit from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Dennis, what would you add?
Did that describe the Don Dennis?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The way you started the question, it's a memory, but it was kind of pushing it toward, Don. And anytime you got close to sort of saying, wow, Don, look what you did, or accept that, man, you would find immediately a pushback and a push up, which would say, well, God has been, and he just always was pointing to what God was doing. Now, we know that's the right answer, but you can tell when it's genuine and is part of the person. And Dad was one who, very positive, as you say, Gordon, wouldn't really talk ill of the dead. But was very, very willing to say, look at what God is doing. Yeah. So I think that trait just drifted into everything he was doing. And it's something, I think most of the Gill clan would say it definitively, that he was very much in his thing. Now, if you really wanted funny stories about Don, you would have to talk to Beverly Gill, because she's the one who was married to him for so many years. And she had a favorite book. And what was it? It was a book written on Sarah Edwards.
Marriage to a Difficult Man?
Marriage to a Difficult Man. That was her, next to the Bible, that was her favorite book. and it was only because you got to understand what it's like to be married to this guy. And
I wonder if Beverly introduced that book to Gail, or Gail introduced the book to Beverly.
Yeah, it could have been either or.
Well, don't mention it to my wife.
Pardon?
Don't mention it to my wife.
Right.
It is a great book, and Gail's kept it almost on her nightstand for 25 years.
Yeah.
Remarkable book, but the title is terrible.
I know.
It doesn't convey the spirit of the book in any way. Sarah Edwards was a beautiful, wonderful, godly mother and encouraged her husband. And to emphasize the difficult man, it's just that Gail had a long correspondence with the publishers trying to convince them to retitle that book, which they never did. But it's a great book.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt. I interrupted you.
No,
A Difficult Man. That's worth looking up then.
It's one of the best books there is for any woman who wants to know how to be a pastor's wife or in Christian service, and any man who wants to understand both the male temperament and the female. It is a well-written book.
Yeah.
And you can tell I approve of it.
I can. Any last thoughts you would want to share that I haven't brought out that you think is significant of that time you would want captured and for folks to hear?
Well, and I mentioned this to you really quickly, Charles, just a few days ago, actually. And that is, when I get the current Vision New England mission update, I have the privilege of sitting through the early years and saying that's exactly what Don Gill would want to see happening. He had a little, it was a brand new idea. Get a newsletter, a paper newsletter circulating around New England. He called it Expect. And it would just be, a couple of pages of what God was doing, how to hook in, how to help you here in ministry. And he just started to circulate that. But I would say that he would be enthused to see, and that's just one dimension of communication in Vision New England today, that he would very quickly be excited to see the ways that things are connecting and continuing to grow in a very new time. We're in a digital age. Everything has to shift so often. So the methods change, the way things are done. But at the heart of it would be being encouraged that God's afoot. He's moving. It's in a different day. There's so many opportunities for us to collaborate, to connect, to encourage, to be, just keeping that vision for what God wants to do in New England. So back to you, really, Charles.
Thanks.
You'd be very encouraged.
That's great.
I don't want to sign off without mentioning what to me, in my years and in my sensitivities, was one of the most important things that ever happened. And that is the Sturbridge Conference of 1970, whatever it was.
Yeah.
450 people were invited and showed. And Dick Halverson was there, I think Leighton Ford. And I'm wondering if Paul Reese didn't make it to that one. Mm-hmm. But that was historic because it brought leaders from every one of the 6 states, all the major cities. Mm-hmm. And they spent 3 days together. Mm. I remember toward the end, I had the privilege of giving the closing sermon, and then there was going to be a Eucharistic service. And everybody had to pick a partner, and then you would give each other the elements. And I always remember that when that moment came, I felt a tug on my side here. And there was the Episcopal Bishop of Massachusetts, who was at that conference. And he knelt in front of me and did as they do in that tradition. Would you please serve me? And, I'm not sure I had enough emotion left after me, because the Episcopalians were talking to the Baptists and the Presbyterians were talking to them. Well, you get my point. But out of that conference would ultimately come 2 years later, the Billy Graham Crusade of 1982 or 83, which a lot of people, date back to their conversion. And then there was a great Sunday school initiative that went for a while. But that 1979, 1980 period, I think, is a major change point in the spirit that caused VNE to happen. And you're going to talk more to Maki about this kind of stuff, but he'll pick it up, and whatever he picks up to talk about has its foundation on that Sturbridge meeting back in the late 70s.
Yeah. I'm glad you shared that too, because I've heard about that, but I didn't know much about it. And guys, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today. Thank you for sharing your reminiscences and helping us capture them. I love to honor our history, but I just think that everything we do, even today, and I appreciate the kind words and encouragement you guys are always giving me, is building on the foundation of everybody who came before us. And when I got involved in Vision New England, the number of times, and I had the privilege of meeting Don a couple of times, again, just a little bit, but boy, the number of people who loved Don Gill after he left Vision New England 20 years before I got involved, and the number of people who remembered Don Gill, whose lives he touched, who valued him, who remembered him well and loved him, was just a testament to the man he was and the work he did. And Dennis, while your point is true, all the glory goes to God. He uses faithful people, and your dad was a faithful person that he used. And so I'm grateful for him, and I'm grateful for you guys. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles, very much.
Thanks, Charles.
To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionnewengland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.